Okay. Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you all again. I hope you're all well. I have a guest with me today, my first official guest on Hey Culture, and this is Dr. Raymond Ciervo. Um, I've known him for a couple of years now, actually. He taught me some subjects at the Bible College where I studied and where I work now as well. And he is a mentor to many. That's, I think, to sum it up, he's really a mentor to many and a father to many, and have really helped raise some great apologists and people who have a love for God and want to enlarge their knowledge of God and of this world. So, Dr. Ray, how are you?
I'm doing well, Reno. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. It's good to
It's a
be
big
here.
pleasure. Yeah, it's great. I want to give you just a quick moment just to tell the people who you are and um, what what's life like for as Raymond Ciervo.
Sure. Well, I would be classified or categorized right now as an apologist. I've been in Christian ministry. This year will be 50 years. That's 50. Um, End of June 1974, the elders of a church that I belonged to at the time laid hands on me and released me into ministry. And I began by working with small groups in New Jersey, where I live now. I was living in New York at the time, and my wife and I would commute to a couple of different groups that we work with. One of them was Community Gospel Church, and that church took off. We were winning a lot of people to the Lord, and I would say, as far as growth and that sort of thing, it was a success. And I still know a good core group of that people today. But my wife and I have been married for 50, I want to say 52 years. I've always got to do the math in my head to remember how long it is. And we have 3 children. One of them has already passed on, but I have 2 sons, and we have 8 great grandchildren, and I believe it's 9 grandchildren. So we've got a tribe there as well. And today, what I do is I either teach apologetics. I do have a website, I do a YouTube channel, Facebook, and all that. But I look to build the church by helping them grow in their faith and also become more proficient in their witness by teaching this subject we call apologetics. But I met Reno, I believe it was about 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago, at a Bible college in South Africa, where I was teaching both apologetics and worldview at the time. I think I might have been teaching a Bible book as well.
Yeah, I think you taught us the Gospel of Luke as well as Hebrews.
Okay, yeah, 2 of my favorite books, and I enjoy South Africa in more than one, or some very practical ways. But I just find it's part of what I do now is visit South Africa a couple of times a year and teach at a Bible college, as well as do some itinerating, not a whole lot, but I do go around to a few churches and conferences if there's anything going on as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's always great to have you here. But you said that you would classify or categorize yourself as an apologist. What is apologetics and how did you get into it?
Sure. Yeah, you can't think that everybody knows what I'm talking about. And apologetics is the concept of defending the historic Christian faith. So what an apologist does, in essence, is learn and know what are the essential doctrines of the faith and what are the evidences for the existence of God, and the resurrection of Jesus. I teach basically that we have to know how we know what is true. So I teach things on truth, on God, the existence of God, and then the historic reliability of the New Testament, especially, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And the question comes up, is there evidence outside of the Bible? The type of apologetics I teach and practice is called classical apologetics, where we believe that you can show that God exists by that which is made, and as well as things like natural law, which is included in what's made, like why something like gravity can show us that it is a precise science and or law, basically, and how things just can't happen by chance. So we talk about intelligent design, um, fine tuning of the universe, and so on. So that's basically what an apologist is. If I were going to pick one lane of all the various lanes there are in apologetics, I would say it's the resurrection, the reliability of the New Testament, and the resurrection of Jesus. I think those are the two things that I always gravitate toward, learning and that sort of thing. Though the fine tuning of the universe is pretty powerful as well. So apologetics is presenting arguments that prove the existence of God and the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Okay. Would it then be fair to assume that you're more into the evidential based apologetics than the, let's say, the more philosophical arguments?
Um, Probably because of the resurrection. I don't know that you can separate those two things as clearly as some people think you can. I might be more. Someone might say that I look at the evidence for the resurrection, but philosophy undergirds everything.
Mm.
Um, so, without playing on words too much, there is a philosophy of apologetics. So the way you do apologetics is based on how you perceive things or why you ask the questions you ask. But to answer your question straightforward, I would say most people would say, yeah, I'm more of an evidentialist. But when I say I'm classical, it's that we see that there are two steps to apologetics. There's the existence of God and then the resurrection of Jesus. So those are the two things that we work
Okay.
to show evidence for. Yeah.
That's exciting. We should definitely schedule an episode in the future to speak more into, to go more into depth with the resurrection as well as the reliability of the New Testament.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How did you get into apologetics?
Uh, Let me just start with, I've always been a student of the Word. I always had a library. I've always been a reader. And my daughter, who grew up in the church that I pastored, two of her friends who were sisters um, went off to college, and within 6 weeks, I think it was up to their, we start in September and go to beginning of December. That would be our first term. And by the time they came home for our Thanksgiving holiday, they both had questions that I didn't have answers for, going back probably over 30 years now. And things like Darwinian evolution, some of the literature that they were reading from Friedrich Nietzsche, and classes they had that basically tried to destroy the idea that the New Testament is inspired, let alone reliable. So that was one thing that happened. Another one was Dr. Peter Singer, who is an atheist and champions the idea that he's a Darwinian evolutionist, He believes that babies are human but not persons. And he's had it in writing. I don't know how much he stands behind it now. He would say that because they're not persons, that taking the life of a baby up to the age of 2 would not be like killing a person. And he became the chairperson for the Center of Human Values at Princeton University, which was just up the road from the church I was pastoring at the time. And it was all over the news of who he was and what he believed. And I got to meet him. I actually asked him to meet with me and have lunch, and we sat down and we had a great discussion on the evidence for what is a person, what is and he would distinguish between a person and a human. He would actually believe that great apes are persons because they have certain characteristics, like they know who they are, they are aware of themselves, self-awareness, they have a view of the past, and they can anticipate the future. And there was a couple of other things that we talked about. And so that would make them a person, where a baby, as far as we know, doesn't have any of those things, is not self-aware. We don't know when a baby becomes a person. He would even admit to that. It'll be different for every one of them. And they have no awareness of the past or so on and so forth. So those two things were two, I would say, major things that happened in my life that I thought I need to learn how to have a discussion with people like Peter Singer, or answer the questions of the two girls that were my daughter's friends at the time, and be able to give them reasonable answers for why I believe the Bible is the Word of God, why I don't believe in Darwinian evolution, which I had no clue on how to answer those things, other than with trite, glib answers, what I call a pat answer. So those two things got me on a tear to read and to try to find more things. And apologetics was where I felt the Lord led me. And I started to just read books. And someone gave me a copy of Can Man Live Without God by Ravi Zacharias in the early 90s. I think the book was just first published. And that really challenged me to know the reasons why you need God in your life, type of thing. So those things basically got me into apologetics, which ultimately led me to Norman Geisler, who was the common name in most of the things I was reading at the time. So that's where we went from there. So that would be how I got started. I went looking on the internet, was brand new, if there was anything out there, and trying to find either a Bible college or a seminary that taught this subject called apologetics. And at best, I found some seminars that were being done as conferences that I went to, one where Paul Copan was teaching, and subsequently got to know Paul pretty well. But that was before 2000. So going back over 25 years, close to maybe 30 years ago. But that started me on my walk with learning apologetics and worldview.
So then you got to meet Dr. Geisler, and then at the later stage in your life, you decided to enroll yourself again, as far as I remember, with Southern Evangelical Seminary.
Right. Yeah. My wife and I, when I started to realize, I think you can be in a bubble where you're just doing Christian things, and most of the people you're meeting are Christian. Even when you're evangelizing, which we were always trying to share the gospel with friends, we never realized where America, the Western world, was going. We didn't realize what was happening in the culture. But when I started to read and study apologetics, at least pursue the subject, um, I started to realize that the culture was just going the wrong way. And my wife and I had a discussion one night. I think we stayed up most of the night talking about it, asking what kind of world will our grandkids grow up in? And would we be okay if we don't do anything um, and not try to influence the church or culture or anything? And the answer to the question we came to was, we had a good marriage, we still do, um, and we thought we could keep doing what we're doing. We could keep pastoring. We had a good group, a good church that we were pastoring. We could just continue to do the normal things that you do when you pastor, or we could make some radical steps. And what we felt like was really strongly impressed on our hearts was that I should resign the church and we should investigate moving to North Carolina, where I would study at Southern Evangelical Seminary. And we made some inquiry about the seminary, talked to the registrar, and then Dr. Geisler actually called me. I actually got a phone call from Norm Geisler. And if you know anything about apologetics, Norm Geisler is the who's who in apologetics. Almost every apologist out there has either studied under him, been influenced by him in some way, or have studied with someone who he taught. That would be true of almost every apologist who's out there. Even some of the big names, like Josh McDowell, has been around since the late 60s, early 70s. He spoke at every conference that Dr. Geisler put on when I first met Dr. Geisler. So even Josh McDowell was good friends with Norm Geisler at the time. And so in the year 2000, I was 52 years old at the time. We moved to Charlotte, North Carolina in July of 2000, where I was enrolled at Southern Evangelical Seminary to do, at the time, I was just doing a certificate degree because I didn't have an undergraduate degree. And so that's where it started. I took two modules, went down. At the time, they would do Saturday to Saturday. You would do 8 hours the first Saturday, be off Sunday, then do four hours a night from Monday to Friday, and do another 8 hours the following Saturday. And my first one was with Gary Habermas, who is the authority on the resurrection. And Dr. Geisler had invited me to stay at his house while I was doing this module, and so was Gary Habermas. And he asked me if I would take Gary Habermas to dinner every night, and I had no idea who I was with. I really didn't know who Gary Habermas was. At the time, I really didn't even know who Dr. Geisler was. But I had my first week was with those two giants in apologetics. And Gary taught the course that I was taking on Introduction to Apologetics, which might be why the New Testament and resurrection is so much part of my wheelhouse today. And
That makes sense.
Yeah. So we had a lot. I had a lot of discussions with Gary about things. I was brand new in apologetics, so even learning the books to read and who to listen to, and that sort of thing. It was all brand new. But that got me started in apologetics. That was in May of 2000. We moved there and took one more module with Ron Rhodes on cults in June, and then we moved down in July. And we stayed in North Carolina for almost 7 years. We moved down in July and we left in March of 2007, moved back here to New Jersey. And I did my master's in 2 years. I went through all 60 hours, 20 courses on apologetics, different things. As you know, you'll find out you take a lot of other courses that you didn't realize were necessary to do. And we thought we were going to stay there 2 years and then move back. We ended up staying almost 7 years. And I needed the time to really get a little bit more of what I had studied, what I was studying. So, yeah. So that's basically how I got involved there, how we got into it.
That is amazing. And as you've just subtly mentioned, I'm starting, for the audience, I'm starting with my master's degree of SES next week. I'm so a bit nervous, but luckily I have your phone number.
Yeah.
So earlier this year, you taught worldview, amongst other things. I think it was Introduction to Logic and Introduction to Apologetics at our second year at the Bible College.
Right.
How would you then define worldview?
There are, I don't have a picture. I should take a picture of my shelf. Worldview is perhaps one of the most misunderstood, yet most important things for us to understand. And the reason why I've got so many books on worldview is I was looking for a concise definition of what worldview is so I could, while I was teaching it. And everybody has a worldview because a worldview is the way that we look at and interact with reality, and how we make sense of it. What are the criteria for understanding a worldview? And at the Bible College, they usually have James Sire's book, The Universe Next Door, which is one look at it. I have about 20 books on worldview on my bookshelf. Some that I really like, some that I don't think are worth the time. James Sire's book is there. He's passed on now, but I think there are 6 editions to The Universe Next Door. And one of the reasons why there are 6 editions is because he kept on trying to keep up with presenting another worldview. I think so, from when he started it, you have things now like radical Islam. How does a Muslim, a radical Muslim, make sense of the world and then interact with it? How do they perceive reality and do that? New Age, I think, was added later on, though, even though that might have been a little bit older, but it's been adjusted. And that can take in everything from astrology to yoga. So it's how do we see these different worldviews? And one of the things that I've come to understand is that there's only one worldview that's right, and that's the biblical worldview. And I would define that as seeing the world through the lens of Scripture, which presupposes that you have to learn what the Bible is about. You have to learn what God's plan for humanity is. And what I teach now is that there are 3 components to every worldview. There is the first one, forgive the big word, it's called epistemology. How do we know what we know? So how do we, if we're going to make sense of the world, we have to be able to know the world. And how do we know what we know? Which, again, is presupposed by this understanding of truth. So I used to teach that you needed to have every worldview has a view of truth, God or ultimate reality, and then humanity. And now what I do is I teach that subject called epistemology. How do we know what we know, which presupposes truth, that there are things that are wrong about when we perceive reality. Like today, there are people who believe the earth is flat, which is amazing to me, that there are still people that are out there that believe they believe the world is flat. They're wrong. I mean, there's no two ways about it. They're wrong. So the only way you could say that there's something that's wrong is presupposing that there's something that's right, that's correct. And obviously, we believe the world is round, the earth is round. So we have to have a way that we apprehend knowledge, and obviously, again, that has the presupposition that truth exists. And then, what is ultimate reality? What's behind it all? Do we live in a senseless world that only exists by an accident? And basically, what I deal with there is the idea of causality. What has caused all of this? Is it an accident? Is it aliens from another universe? Which asks another question, where do they come from? What caused them to exist? Or is there an ultimate cause that is what Aristotle called the uncaused cause? Is there a being that is uncaused, that exists? So you have to have some view of where did all this stuff come from. Trying to think of the name of Sire's other book, Naming the Elephant is what he calls it. And it is basically a book on causality. It's looking at, he has the Hindu view that, what's holding up the earth? It's on the back of an elephant. Or what's holding up that elephant? It's another elephant. And it's just elephants all the way down. So he called the book Naming the Elephant. So you have to have that understanding of how do we know what we know. If you want to just shrink it down to knowledge, what's the basis for knowledge? What caused it all? What's caused what we call reality? And then what is a human? And you need at least those three things to function in the world and have your worldview work. So knowledge, causality, and humanity. And then, when you look at humanity, you have to ask the question, is man an animal, or is he a created being with a conscience? And is man moral? And if he's moral, what morals matter? So when I teach worldview now, those are the three things that I teach, and basically still working on getting them all lined up with, what's a Marxist view of reality. Marxism today would say that the way you know what you know is whatever the government tells you is true. It doesn't. There is no Aristotelian definition for truth as that which corresponds to what's real. They tell you what's real. The government tells you that. They are Darwinian evolutionists in the sense of what is the cause of it all. It's an accident. We're just here. And of course, humans are perhaps the measure of everything. But again, it's all based on what the Communist Manifesto says, how it separates the oppressor and the oppressed, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. So that's one thing. The reason why I'm focused so much on Marxism is I'm writing a paper on it right now. So I'm actually having to read all the Marxist ideologies. And basically you see what their worldview is and how you have to deal with it. So those three things, I know it's a really long answer for a simple question, like what is a worldview? But I think it's so important for us to be able to identify those things, how we make sense of them.
Mm.
Yeah.
So would you then say, I think James Sire in his book has eight tenets that he looks at. Would you then
Right.
say that those eight kind of you can categorize under these three headings?
Oh, yeah. I think when you investigate any of them, you have to deal with those things.
Mm.
Um, as Christians, I think, and this ruffles some feathers of certain camps of Christianity to say that, truth, we look at truth from an Aristotelian or Thomistic viewpoint, in that truth is that which corresponds to reality, and how knowledge is something that we apprehend with our senses, and our minds take those things to make sense of what they are. And of course, we would add that there is revelation from God, but there's a but in there. God reveals things to us, but we still have to reason whether that revelation is from God or not. I mean, First John tells us that we should test the spirits to see whether they be of God or not. So not everything spiritual is good, and not every revelation is from God. Paul tells us that even Satan shows up as an angel of light. So we have to have this ability, an agency in our minds to be able to tell whether something is true or not true, whether it corresponds to what's real. And I think the Bible gives us a great platform to see reality. But the Bible doesn't talk about everything in the world. It doesn't. It doesn't talk about. Doesn't mention certain things. That doesn't mean that they're wrong or that they don't exist if they're not in the Bible. But they are extra biblical, and the Bible is a very specific book for us to see the revelation of who Jesus is, as well as to see our own sinfulness and the need for a savior. Um, so
Okay. Would you then say that it's important for Christians, or actually not just Christians, but for all people, to be familiar with other worldviews and also to be able to understand and articulate their own worldview?
yes, to both of those. I think to be a well-rounded person, you should know not only what you believe, but why you believe it. And your actions should be based on those on those beliefs. Christians ought to act a certain way because they believe certain things to be true about reality, and people in the world should be held to the same standard. Uh, they should we should be able to help people understand their actions by what they believe, and be able to find opportunity to share the gospel with them. I think those are important things.
Okay. Um, would you say that in general people understand their own worldviews, or that people are familiar with worldviews, or are they merely kind of tossed to and fro in the waves? Because my view on it is that our culture is impacted by different worldviews and by different ideologies, and if you're not if you haven't familiarized yourself with different things, you're impacted by it, but you don't even know what you're impacted by.
Yeah,
Which, so I guess what I'm getting at is that, especially within my perspective and people I've came across and the the culture that I grew up in and living in South Africa, I think that the majority of people are merely impacted by things and don't actually know what is impacting them.
yeah. I think there different forces drive drive every culture, and I think economics is one of them, as well as education, and I would say even entertainment um, drive certain cultures, some more than others. Um, like I can, from what I know of South Africa, I know the complexity of the culture because of the different ethnic groups that make up South Africa. You put history on top of that, or infiltrating that, and it's affecting, as you've mentioned, where you grow up. Um, Here in the U.S., I grew up in the Northeast in a multi-ethnic home. I say multi-ethnic. We were growing up. I grew up in an Italian American home. My grandparents were immigrants, and my parents, neither one of them spoke English until they were. My mother didn't speak English until she was in school, which she would have been 6 or 7 years old at the time, maybe 5 or 6, and neither did my father. So we grew up in a very ethnic home, and they were very family oriented. I would say that family was the most important thing to them. They would be having a very hard time with culture today, as I am, in that family has really not the top of the list anymore. Family was more important than anything else. Um, so much so, we ate dinner together every night of the week, and had massive dinners on Sunday because of extended families, that sort of thing. So that definitely affects the way things are. And I think today, what we call Gen Z, you know, they grew up with iPhones or grew up with cell phones. They don't know what life is like without Google, um,
That's true.
which is really astounding when you start to think about it. That the Gen Z in particular here in the States, they look for affirmation not to their parents, but to their friends on their phone. Um, and so you have this other added influence, which is basically their worldview. Um, they would rather give up just about anything other than their phone. That's not a joke, and it's not something to make somebody laugh, but that's been a poll that's been um, given to what we call Gen Z people today, young adults, that they don't care who the president will be, they don't care what kind of government we'd have. They'd trade all that away to keep their phone, which is, to me, is like astounding. Um, but you
That
got,
is a frightening reality.
yeah, it
That is a
is. It's
frightening
very frightening.
reality.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
we're seeing. I don't know if I'm sure the news has kind of made it over to South Africa as well. At this time, while we're recording, we have universities here in the States that are demonstrating pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, and gotten violent. It started with Columbia University, then the University of Southern California, or UCLA, and some in Portland. I think I was just seeing this morning. There were some other things, and you have to ask the question. How did these people, who I don't think they could draw a map of where Israel is in the Middle East, and show me where Gaza is on a map. I don't think they even know what Palestinians stand for. I don't think they know the difference between, say, Hamas and Palestine. Um, but they're seeing things through a particular lens, and it's an oppressor slash oppressed lens, or an oppressor slash marginalized lens. And they think that the Palestinians are being mistreated, and have been mistreated for the last 100 years, perhaps almost
And
100 years.
and that or the things you mentioned, that comes back to what you mentioned earlier about Marx, and you said you're writing a paper on him. Um,
Yeah.
f- Keeping that in mind, how is worldview tied into culture, religion, and politics?
Well, worldview is the roots of every culture. So while we can have a personal worldview, culture is the expression of the corporate worldview. So one of the ways that I illustrate this is looking at a tree. That when we look at a tree, we see the trunk, we see the branches and the leaves, maybe even the fruit on it, but we don't take a whole lot of notice of what feeds that, which is the roots. The roots are the apparatus that basically feeds that culture. So what we're seeing now is that there is a Marxist, communist, neo-Marxist, cultural Marxist, whatever you want, Marxism that is feeding that culture every day. And unless we understand why they're doing what they're doing and demonstrating, we just think they're, you know, spoiled rich kids that basically don't know what they're doing and just out there um, demonstrating or protesting, where they're really being driven by something that is beneath the surface and being led along by what we call agitators. But that's where worldview and culture work together. So politics is really fed by worldview. Everything is. Your education system is part of a worldview. The way your country does politics is part of your worldview. Again, I can demonstrate from the U.S. and we say we're a constitutional democracy, or a constitutional republic would be a more clear way of saying that. And we have state government, city government, everything like that. That's all based on a document. And America is one of the first countries to be formed based on a document rather than a personality. So we have no monarchy, nothing like that. We're a constitutional republic. So yeah, so worldview affects all of those things.
Would you then agree with there's a common, almost cliche statement on social media these days, but would you agree with the statement saying that politics is downstream from culture and that culture is then affected and kind of formed by ideas at universities?
Yeah, universities do a lot to educate, um, form people's worldview, and that's part of what we're seeing. So politics is part of culture, as well as entertainment, education, sports, if that fits into entertainment. And so all those things are basically driven by what the universities are teaching. They're the universities, especially here in the States, and I know in South Africa you have similar issues, that they are neo-Marxist, and I can name the people that have influenced universities around the world, from Herbert Marcuse and Paulo Freire. He's a Brazilian. Marcuse was a German, maybe a generation before Freire, but they're basically influencing the education of young people. Started out in universities in the States. It's worked its way all the way down into what we call grade schools.
Another frightening reality, definitely. Yeah. I think we see it in South Africa as well, and see it definitely play out. And I think especially with our history with ethnic and racial tensions, I think the whole neo-Marxist, especially critical race theory element, kind of
Yes.
manipulates that whole situation, and it manipulates, in South Africa specifically, the history that we do have. Um, so one does definitely see it play out, and also I think you see it in the legislation that governments try to pass a lot of times. And for my fellow South Africans, there is a organization called 4SA that keeps you up to date with new bills that are being passed, where you can sign a petition to those that you don't agree with, to that they then I think the 4SA people are started by a group of lawyers, and then they would present it. But yeah, it's shocking to me how, if you just go through life with blinders on, you're affected by these things, but you don't even know it.
Right. Especially critical theory. There's an excellent book called Cynical Theories by Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay that look at really the basis of what critical theory is. And you could put any adjective in the middle of those two words. So it could be critical race theory, critical queer theory, critical women theory. Doesn't matter. Any one of those descriptors could be put in the middle. And basically, they say the same thing. And I would define them as a neo-Marxist understanding of the oppressed and the oppressor. And most of them would designate the white male as the oppressor. And everybody who is marginalized, so almost everybody who is not a white male, whether you are gay, women, black, Hispanic, whatever you want, as long as you're not a white male, you are the marginalized and being oppressed by that person. And this fits under that category of what it means to be human. Is there a morality in, is man a moral being? And can we say there's bad behavior and good behavior? And so you have that critical theory in everything today, and it's all being played against the person in power, even in countries that it's say a black or different person who is the other than white people. It could be Asian, whatever. You're the marginalized. So it's a very, very interesting perspective of what's happening, and something that only the gospel can speak to. Only the gospel can redeem this understanding of things. Yeah.
Thank you, Uncle Ray. Then some of my last questions that I have for you is, where could a lay person who would like to know more about worldview and also more about how to evaluate the world and ideas around them, where can they go to educate themselves a bit more?
There's a number of good websites that deal with it. I try to stay on YouTube these days. Not always as consistent as I'd like to be, but my YouTube channel is just Ray Ciervo Ministries. And I have a Facebook page that has the same descriptor on it, Ray Ciervo Ministries. And I don't do Instagram as much as I'd like to. I probably would try to step it up this summer, or as we get closer to what we call summer here, June, July, and August. But there's a number of good websites. Frank Turek is a good friend of mine. His Cross-Examine deals with worldview quite a lot. His YouTube channel is Cross-Examine. That's also his website. And Jim Wallace or J. Warner Wallace would be another one. But they would certainly be places that I would recommend that people go to. Greg Kokel with Stand to Reason is another one who he deals. Greg does a 3-hour radio show. Used to, I don't know if he still does it, every day, where he lets people phone in and talks to people about different issues. But all those things would be helpful. Um, my granddaughter and I do some videos together. We had to take a break for a while because I was traveling. I was on vacation for like 3 weeks. But now we're just getting back into it. After this week, I'm away this weekend, but then following this, I'm home all summer until actually I return to South Africa the middle of August, I believe it is. So we'll be doing more videos there as well.
Okay. Yeah, definitely looking forward to seeing you when you're back in South Africa. But you also have a book, right?
Yes, I wrote a book some years ago called Apologetics for the Rest of Us, which is available on Amazon. I don't know if Amazon delivers to South Africa anymore. And so it might be hard to get hold of.
As far as I know, they still do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, as far as I know, they still do. Okay.
Good.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. I'll see to it put a link to your YouTube channel in the description, that people can find it easier. But thank you
Great.
very much for this discussion, and thank you for teaching us and enlightening us as to what worldview is.
You're very welcome. My pleasure. Good to be
Thank
with
you.
you.
Thank you. Okay. Goodbye, everyone, and see you guys next time.